Hey y'all, this is Reverence for Impulse, and we are Weena and Tim, sister and brother.
We're both into somatics and movement, and this season we're talking about relationships.
And how the impulses towards connection, protection, and creation shape the way we come together.
Thanks for following your impulse to listen in. So this podcast starts with me asking our guest Daniel Foor why he agreed to speak with us. And I was half joking because he's got a good amount of presence on the teaching scene around specifically ancestral arts and things like that. And Ween and I have like dabbled in his classes and stuff, but we've really just been admiring him from afar and like asking him that question, why did you agree to be on the podcast? We wanted to let you know why we invited him. Like, he's somebody I've admired personally for many years. And specifically, he's like a white dude in his late 40s who has actually expatriated himself, which I did a bit as a kid or as a youth, but also considered an adult life. But he's gone from the suburban, normie, white American upbringing into this radically different direction, which is about working with the dead and working with other than human people. That's about Islam, that's about Orisha traditions, and really helping people who had been severed from culture and continuity, like himself, back into things. I found that really fascinating and an easy mirror for me to begin relating with. And the conversation went in lots of places. It's a cool one.
Mm-hmm. And like you said earlier, part of what's so awesome about Daniel and why I have such admiration for him is, as like you said earlier, Tim, that he is offering all of this as learnable skills, that these rituals and ideas are things you can actually learn if they resonate for you, and you can make that kind of radical shift into a kind of lineage or culture that feels resonant for you in a way that it feels like
And personal to you.
and personal, yeah, that
Yeah.
in a way that feels like you can belong to this as well. And that's, I've watched him, in courses and in classes. And I guess for me, there's an integrity in the nuance he holds in this very niche kind of place. But I'm also just deeply curious about who he is as a person, as a human, navigating that kind of line of work with the reality of like living his life as a dad and a husband, and how that looks, in everyday ways. So it was such an honor to have him and a pleasure to speak with him and learn more about that.
Yeah, all that and more coming right up in this episode.
Why did you agree to talk to us today? Like,
I have the impression that you're both really authentic people, and that there is an opportunity for a less straightforward conversation or whatever. I'm not sure, where that wants to flow, and I'm kind of looking to you all for where's an interesting place to drive things. Like, I feel open and responsive without an agenda so much in our time. But no, I just had the impression from each of you as being like true to yourselves and discerning, and like you would know the right questions to ask to make it interesting. So, yeah,
We do.
right.
okay.
All of a sudden, I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
What was your next question, Weena?
well, let me check." I was going to say, I do appreciate the weirdness and the niche that you hold. And I remember I came across you through Rooted, obviously, but also Amber McZeal. I had a conversation / sort of consultation with her about some struggles I was having. And she said, go to Daniel. She's like, check out his. And I did practical animism. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And yeah. So I've been very curious, and also what you do in the weird niche space that you hold feels so still kind of otherworldly to me, because I'm doing, I think most of what I'm talking about or thinking about is so much around the body
Yeah.
But it came up recently where I thought about impulse, and I talk a lot about impulse, but I've had a strong feeling that it wasn't mine, that it's not my impulse, and it's actually not the other person's either. And we started talking about impulse as ancestral or as spirit, and then I started to feel closer to your world. I think my question I have is like, what is your relationship? Like, what does impulse mean to you or make you think of?
I feel like I want to back up for a second to contextualize for people listening where I'm coming from as a like kind of circuitous way to answer your question. So I, because I realize part of me doesn't feel settled as I could in the conversation yet because I haven't situated myself.
Okay.
And so I'm ancestrally down lineage from early English and German settler colonialists to North America. And I grew up there. I live now in Spain. And I was not raised with any kind of ritual or earth connection or anything like that. I sought it out as an adult. So I trained as a doctor of psychology and a therapist, but mostly as a ritualist. And that's mostly what I've been doing for the last 20, 30 years is immersing in different religious, spiritual systems. And I don't need to say all about my background with that, besides maybe that I'm a practicing Muslim, I'm initiated in West African Yoruba Orisha tradition, and have an animist, earth-honoring orientation to things. And I work as a professional ritualist. So I teach people about ancestral reconnection, about earth reconnection, things like that. And I also am mouthy and committed to a decolonial, anti-imperialist way of being in the world. And over the last 20 years, and maybe in the last 10 years of that, it's been more and more obvious to me the cultural implications of ancestral healing work and earth reconnection work. And so I've been gradually connecting the dots and getting more educated and able to speak about matters of culture and around different systemic oppression and all that. And situating myself in that, of course, as someone with a kind of apex privilege as a cisgendered middle-class American white dude, et cetera, all the different identities of privilege. And so part of what I'm excited about these days in my teaching that comes up a lot, one is naming, identifying, and interrupting extreme individualism as a kind of feature of especially U.S. culture, which can be a lot of things depending on who you are. So like white, dominant, colonialist flavored U.S. culture. And seeing how that conditioning of being very separate, really, and there are some good things to it, but mostly it's very isolating, can lead to all kinds of problems. It can interfere with our ability to connect with the rest of life. It can, it gets in the way of intimacy and good politics and happy relationships and all of it. And it comes up when people talk about somatic influence as well. Or even, so we could talk about what's happening with the body, but there tends to be an assumption that everything in our field of perception is me and that this is my body. And of course, on a practical level, we need to honor consent and boundaries and be sensible about stuff. But also, even what we think of as the body is interdependent, it's entangled, it's not just us individually. I mean, where the majority of the cells of the body that is the Daniel speaking are not genetically me. They're other than me. I'm like completely colonized by microorganisms, and to start with. And so within that, if we move beyond just a physical channel, the tendency of individualism is also to say, these are my thoughts, like my thoughts, my feelings, my ideas, my impulse, my desire, my longing. Yeah, of course, practically everybody knows what you mean when you say that. But when we take it to heart, it's like we're claiming ownership over consciousness when we're very porous and we're very interdependent. And it's a lonely way to be. It's part of the, I see, even having moved to Spain a couple of years ago, one thing I say to our friends here when I'm trying to capture the differences, because with the U.S., is that there's less bitterness here. Part of that's the lack of socialized medicine and health and university, and less gun violence in Spain compared to the U.S., things like that, and less overt racism. But it's also less extreme individualism. People focus more on relationships. Their identity is more relationally constructed. And so, yeah, it comes out of my own journey of like detoxing from like workaholism and just US culture in a lot of ways. And after 7-10 generations of my people settling, often aggressively in the US, throwing in the towel and being like, it's not working. We need to do a different thing now. But also, it comes from tracking as a ritualist, helping people to get reconnected and wondering like what actually works for that, what supports it, what gets in the way of it. And one thing that helps is softening the need to be like, this is my feeling, my thought, my experience. There might be some reclaiming of that that's important, but then on the other side of that, we're being dreamed up also by the earth. We're interdependent with all these other beings. And that's cool. That's magical. That's an invitation. Yeah.
It's so magical. Like when you allow, like you said, for identity to soften a little bit. I mean, transcending ego or dealing with ego is at the heart of a lot of human spiritual endeavors, I guess. I'm curious, like, when do you notice, like today, when did you notice, if at all, some moment when it really was like a youing you kind of moment, and made a decision, had a noticing, made a decision, shifted, softened? Because I've had many experiences personally in ceremony, workshops, webinars, where in group settings, which of course that illustrates the point, right? When we become an organism, how much more can happen. But I've had these experiences of softening, and then in regular life, it feels there's a little bit of a haze that comes over me, and I'm curious if you experience it, what you would call it, and how you work with it in just the regular day.
I can think of something yesterday where my spiritual training, I guess you'd say, whether it's with daily prayer with Islam or sitting in Zen retreats years ago, kicked in. Our 4-year-old stole my wallet, which I actually needed not that long after that. She didn't want to give it back. She locked herself or closed herself in the room. And some part of me is just like, I felt myself starting to want to be intense about it. I'm like, oh my God, Issa, give me my fucking wallet, you know? And I didn't get that intense, but I'm like, hey, I need that. And she's like, I got you. And I'm like, damn it. And so I kind of paused, because my inner, like, for me, I need a lot of inner restraint to not occasionally crush my kids when they're being like completely annoying. I love them like crazy. And sometimes like hitting you in the face. And I'm like, anyone that hits me in the face, I will immobilize them and say, oh wait, that's a 4-year-old. Don't do it. Yeah. And so, so I paused, and another layer of what arises is my brother bullying me as a kid. I love him, we're good now, but he was hard on me when I was a kid. And so there's a moment, we're playing keep away, and someone just took my things. And so I'm having an experience actually of being bullied by my 4-year-old. And I can see that and also make space for my own hurt in that, and see that now, how old am I? What year is it? What time? Like, what's going on? So now there's this whole other layer. And then not become, not push that away either, but not become identified with it. Okay, so making space for this, making space for this. And then eventually I just went down and went in and sat next to our kid. And I wasn't trying to get my wallet back anymore at that point. I'm like, all right, give up. And she gave it back. She felt kind of shy about it. But there was for me in that moment, it's like we're having a dance. It's not all about me and what I need. It's not, I'm able to like honor what's arising, but not be stuck to it. And I'm not saying I can always do that or whatever, but it was a moment where if I have to reflect on it, like in the last day, the ability to be spacious and not sticky with the experience that was arising allowed for some layers to move through. And I don't know that those layers I would have gotten to the other layers, or the ability to just sit with her without knowing where that's going to head, if I hadn't carved out the spaciousness. So that's it's for me, it's not about pushing away, like, oh, don't identify with this experience. Like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just making space around it so another layer can unfold. Yeah.
Do you think there's, I'm noticing inside myself these really strong impulses to push against kind of both of what you're saying, but I don't know why yet. So I'm just going to say that out loud. I think one way to sort of ease into exploring it is asking, is there a place for that kind of force? Is there a place or a role for where the fuck is my wallet? Does that have a location and a value?
Oh yeah. No, I don't. I for sure. I just know that anytime I get intense at all with my kids, it almost always goes badly. Like, I've had times where I'm doing my daily prayer and they're climbing on me and I'm just like, get the fuck off me. Like, I'm praying, give me 2 minutes. Like, I want my space. And then like I go down and do a prostration and my kid slides off my back and like bumps their nose and then they have a bloody nose. I'm like, awesome. I'm super awesome. I just gave my 4-year-old a bloody nose while praying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even being that intense. I just did a prostration. And so I have had to learn I can state how I'm feeling, but it's unreasonable even to expect them to be able to do much with that. Like,
go
ahead.
So that outcome was a bad outcome, I guess. I hold question around that.
I don't know. I don't have the idea that anger should be repressed or blocked or isn't good or anything like that. So I don't. For me, I don't try to block what's arising, but I just know that I've had to learn as a parent and as a husband and as just like a person in my leadership role that I rarely get past like only 50% filtering. And it's not that I'm never unfiltered in my life, but I don't know. I sit within myself on a lot of intensity, a lot of fire, a lot of rage, a lot of just strong feeling. And having experimented with more or less filtering, especially as a dude, especially if I'm in position of privilege or of like responsibility with teaching, I have to be, or parenting, which is this nonstop like position of power. I have to be very filtered and make sure that doesn't lead to a buildup and repression. But the filtering is part of a responsible navigation of intense energy, especially in a male body, considering the level of sexism and abuse of power in the world.
So where does that go? Like, is there a place for your like male rage? And I'm not speaking like cathartic. I mean, I guess there are rage rooms, which are appealing to me, but I've never been in. Do you know where you break something? But is there a location or place where that wildness or force has a place to be?
Some, it shows up in my teaching in ways, and not as because when I'm really angry, I tend to be focused
Mm-hmm.
rather than like, I need to break something, like respect to that expression of it, but it tends to be more like quiet, deliberate, nuclear energy. And that does show up in my public teaching at times. It shows up in my, in some ways on social media, where I'm taking a real pointed stance around colonialism. And not always, sometimes I piss people off or hurt people's feelings or just go too far or whatever, but it shows up there some. And other times I just bring it to prayer, and I'm just like, oh my God, like help me to like transmute a little bit of this, not to block it, but to actually like let it breathe to become another thing, to be able to name, I'm so angry,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm so whatever. I'm not blocking it, but I'm not sure what to do with this. So I'm giving it space to be, and then it shifts or moves or whatever. Yeah.
I'm thinking of it because last Sunday I really got so angry, and I knew that I needed to remove myself from a relationship. But one thing I experimented with was like just going deep into the fantasy and playing music that expressed it well, and I cleaned, or I just was like very tucked away, but inside the sort of darkness, as a way of like, okay, like let's go here and be fully here in your body, scrub whatever, do the thing to sort of see how it plays out, almost like, run the kid till they're tired and can take a nap. A little bit of that, sort of an adolescent sort of like desire to explore. And it did feel younger, like definitely a teen effect, but there was a real indulgence in it. Felt like a real indulgent kind of, the only way I could justify it was that I was also cleaning. So I didn't feel completely like I'm taking up an entire day of my family's, together time this way. But it did shift, but I don't know that it was like, I will say, like, I appreciate those places because I think that they are rooms that need to be lived in a little bit inside myself. I wouldn't do it a lot. I haven't done it a lot. I don't know that I can say it like benefited me greatly, except that it allowed it to settle. It let the voice get quieter and
One of the things
reintegrate.
that I've in the last year, I've taught publicly in a way that was well received and encouraged me to do more of it, to something I've been wanting to teach to for like a while. So I taught a course on evil and malice, on curses, on unhelpful possession states, and I'm planning another course on manipulation and deception, and cunning, and how to know that within ourselves, to work with it, to recognize it. It's not all bad. What's it being used for, and all that. And so I hold a strong ethic that nothing is off limits to think or conceive of, or even to feel. We just seem to be like deliberate in what we're actually doing. And so, yeah, what to say? I lost my train of thought a little, but I was going to say that in my own journey as an initiate, specifically with the initiations into Orisha priesthoods that I've done, those come at times with taboos around misuse of speech. And so even if I'm venting, which I'll do with my therapist or to my wife or to a few close friends, where I can just like use my words in a sharp way, I have to be mindful that nothing resembles the contours of like a curse. I'm not wishing ill for anyone, even if I really don't like them at all, or what they're doing. And so there's a fine line that they're just restrictions on how energy is directed that come along with certain initiatory work. And so it is important still to find ways to express like raw anger or fear or whatever it might be, things that could come out as really hot and really like directed negative energy. Yeah.
I was curious, this is a little bit of a gear shift, but kind of not, because I'm asking you, we're sharing questions about our personal lives. Like, you shared these experiences with your kids. Weena, you talked about this rage. Like in the sense of culture of non-individual awareness organization, like I think we're also all in this time of like real heightened polarization and a lot of like friction between what has been and questions about it. And like, yeah, I definitely have seen you on social media speaking around Gaza, speaking around all sorts of colonial projects and problems and frictions. And so I think we're also kind of feeling that, like when this question of rage or unexpressed feelings comes up, I think some of what we're holding is well beyond this body.
Yeah.
And part of what was useful and what I heard you sharing about your moment with the wallet is, to me, it was like a broadening of the container, like me, her, wallet. And it's like, all of a sudden it's like brother, bullying, past, time, the scale of time. Like suddenly it's sort of like sitting in this like bigger pool of everythingness. And then it's sort of like, yeah, like even Weena and I talked yesterday, we were like, before each podcast, we're like, is this going to be fun or useful at all? And I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, we don't have to release it. We don't like it. Like, I don't know. He could be a total dud, And so,
Yeah.
but
I
just
think
like,
yeah.
but just like broadening out to like what's happening right now between this, and this sits inside of something so much bigger. And we're sitting inside of that, and we're in this like kind of cultural space. And this actually is a question that came up as I thought about speaking with you, because of how I've heard you speak and what I've heard you speak on. The question I have, or that I'm holding for myself, is I'm curious to explore what we're losing right now, like what collectively we're losing, because I experience in myself and in other people in conversations, like even on the MAGA side, like we've lost, what was, and we want to go, like this concept of like something really important is being lost, is being taken from us, and I've really been holding that question of loss and the collective loss. And I was curious how that lands with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just say some stuff and see what happens. In addition to teaching about individualism and how to find our way out of it, I lately have circled back and felt really passionate about how being immersed in ritual and healing arts weirds out our sense of time, and work with the ancestors weirds out our sense of time. And that like when we're living in the same pattern of a thing, whether it's my childhood or what started that pattern of my brother being like that, it's like generational. And so there's different scales, like how do I be decolonial with my parenting and not just politically oriented? And then there's different scales of time, like where we're shifting one thing in the moment that suddenly shifts other moments. And yeah, so time is not so linear. But in terms of the moment we're in culturally, well, I mean, I have I guess a habit of saying unpopular things in some ways. I would never have and did not vote for Donald Trump. And I know in this moment of like a month in or less, everyone is very understandably, not everyone, but many people in the US and beyond are kind of freaking out at how quickly the fascist tendencies are moving through the system, and how destabilizing that is. For me, the thing I like about it, which I don't like very much about it, but the thing I like about it is the congruency. And it feels like he's using his out loud voice for what America has been for a long time. Not only, I think the United States isn't only just one thing, but the hundreds and hundreds of military bases throughout the world, the unwillingness to have any kind of process to face the double genocides toward indigenous people and African people that the U.S. is founded on, the tremendous inequality financially between the rich and the poor in the United States. And, I could go on. It's not that interesting to just like politically trash the United States, but there's something to me about like now we have a diagnosis. Now it is so like for those who haven't like, because many people, indigenous people, people of color, people who are like attuned to the colonial dynamics, there's something new or surprising about what's happening. It's like, yeah, we've been fucking saying that the whole time is kind of the reaction. And so for a lot of those people, it's just like, oh my God, it's taking a long time for enough people to get on board with what's going on. And there's a lot of suffering along the way. But perhaps if I have to dig for a silver lining in the flood of bad news, maybe it is the case that a critical mass of people will realize like, oh, this actually isn't, this has been here the whole time. This isn't new. Trump is like a reincarnation of Jefferson Davis, and we have a Civil War president. And maybe it's time we actually believed some of the decolonial far left people when they're like, the whole system that is set up in a very imperialist way. And so if there's that kind of breakthrough, that's useful. But in the meantime, there's a lot of harm and a lot of real, not just fear, but direct impact and suffering for other than white Christian cisgendered men with money. And even
what's interesting to me is even those guys feel like they're losing something.
Yeah,
like
that's his thing. Yeah, thanks for bringing it back. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what are we, I feel like I'm losing something. But when I start
description, there's like part of me that feels like, I hear what you're saying, Daniel, and it feels a little bit like, well, duh, of course this would kind of happen a little bit, which is, yes. And it's similar to what I'm thinking about, like with your kid in the wallet, which is like, there's a part of me that is hurting and wants to root for the people that do say, give me my fucking wallet, and be like, you know what? It's okay. Like there are worse things than you coming at your kid with that, only because there's this ideal of being good that is so intense, specifically for women and mothers, that is unattainable, that like these versions of how to be good, and even societally, like, or to be to decolonialize your home and it's like the entanglement is so intense, and the idea of doing that well feels so impossible at times, that I feel hurting for all the folks that are kind of doing their best, and it's always going to fall short. And there's like, yeah.
I appreciate both of what you're bringing. I don't, from my side, I might come across this way. It's not my intent to, but I don't have some like purity, gotta be good, gotta do it right story. I see that at times in the American left, and it feels really puritanical and really like creepy and culty. And I'm like, oh, I don't want that. Like, there needs to be love and kindness and messiness and like pragmatic coalition building and all that. And I also am really not, one thing I'm not picking up in this moment is like Trump and all those people are monsters. They're terrible. They're subhuman or anything like that. I'm like, no, that's the polarization and dehumanization that gets us in this mess to begin with. And I was just recording a course earlier today and sharing examples of how pleasing it is when I hear of leftists being disarmed by being treated with love and community and kindness by conservative Republicans, because they expect that they're just going to be monsters or something. And so maybe what's being lost is the comfortable like righteousness of one stance being like the correct stance. I don't know. I would hope that we could drop out of that. This like the Democrats will eventually win in the US and then it will be an eco-socialist utopia. Like that's not going to happen like that. And so how do we build coalitions with people that we have previously dehumanized in order to actually get at the root of the change that's needed? Part of who gets lost in that, I mean, my view is our politics won't really work until we include the spirits of the rivers and the dead and the mountains and the nature spirits and the others who are not even human in the organizing, in the work. There are groups that have been doing that the whole time. In general, indigenous organizing looks that way, but including their actual voices in the meetings, in the really, like, we have a really urgent need to address something. Cool. Have we actually allowed any silence in that space? Have we allowed for the spirits to be heard in any way? If not, there's a human centrism that sucks the air out of the room. And the land will always feel other. And the sense of belonging won't be there enough to I don't know, to be rooted, for it to be messy and to actually get good outcomes. I know that can land as like, oh great, another way to get it wrong. Like now we got to do this too, you know. So I don't mean it in that way. It's just like
you can see something that's missing without insisting that it always be present in a certain way.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, who gets deemed the translator of the land, and like, how is their interpretation or translation into actionable steps being vetted?
Those are really good questions that have practical answers in communities where there's always been folks who are designated stewards of certain mountains or rivers or places. People bring their dreams. There's a need to slow down and listen to multiple perspectives. And I don't know, there's not just one right answer to that. Grappling with the question will bring the answer as like, okay, we need to listen to the salmon. We're 20 people here who care about this. Let's try. I think giving it a good, messy effort will move things in the right direction. I don't think it has to be perfect any more than our human-to-human relations aren't perfect. We allow space for misunderstanding and all that. But trying is most of the way there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that's my whole MO with Impulse, really, is listening, to have a response, not follow attitude, but a response and a conversation that the trying is really where communication can develop and grow into something intimate and connected. And I need to do authentic movement with salmon is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's great.
Really? I can't do it I've done it outside. You can do it with nature and watch, witness, and move.
In some ways, like a 2-minute summary of my last 20 or 30 years of immersion in ritual arts and culture and psychology would go something like, I realized I come from people who broke their culture, mostly. I went and spent dedicated time in lots of different earth honoring, sometimes indigenous circles, and tracked what was going on there to the best of my ability. And then I realized that the 95% of humans like me who are not indigenous need to figure out how to do similar things in a not creepy, appropriative way of loving the land and being transformed by those relationships so deeply that our laws, our education, our community gatherings and all that start to include the others. That's it. And like everything else is like the details. Like, how do we actually do that? How do we get there? Like, I have my own style, which works for some people and doesn't work for some people, but I'm in some ways like, here's the tech, here's ways to think about it, here's ways to put it into practice. Go figure out what works for you, but here are the principles. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
And
say it's similar and different in a completely different approach, but all the values are lined up with that.
and there are governments around the world that are putting this into practice.
Mm-hmm.
They're like real dedicated work in Bolivia, Ecuador, New Zealand, other places. But mostly those are indigenous groups, less than, like made the non-indigenous majority of humans on Earth have those same sensibilities. They're human sensibilities of relationship. It's just relationship.
Relationship.
Not even spirituality. I'm just like over it with being a spiritual teacher. What the fuck? Like it's a whole like false category. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious I often find myself curious about the human lifespan, because when we talked about like the relative amount of time, like the relativity of time, it's like everything, like, oh my God, that 4-minute authentic movement felt so long. It's like, that's 4 minutes. And then, occasionally I've been on a walk and we were talking about like whether we're having this debate, whether whales were originally on land and ended up in the water or vice versa. And we just started to think about like animal evolution, and then, 50 million years of these tiny microscopic shifts in breeding and genetics and offspring and survival rates. And like the scales are crazy. And sometimes I think like humans forget everything. Luckily we're not all being born in a series, like next round, it's happening kind of like popcorn style. Like, I feel like we forget everything. And your work, I think, is very much about like how bringing attention back to the fact that there's this continuity that goes through. And sometimes I feel doubt around that, because when I think about the 2-minute synopsis, recognizing who you are, where you've come from, what the effect of you and your ancestors' culture has been, and then right relationship kind of stemming from that. Like, let's put it into the public meetings in the schools, but I feel like it will, like, another crop of kids will come up and they won't know it, or it, like, the maintenance of that. Yeah. Like, is it really in us? Is there something that you can reliably turn to that's like all the way through time, or do we have to reteach it constantly, always?
I love the question. Yeah. Did you want to say anything, Weena?
No, go ahead.
A couple of things. For one, it reminds me of Ibram Kendi's work, Stamped from the Beginning, where he's sharing that he had this internalized view, which I did as well, and his work helped me to rethink it, that racist ideas lead to racist systems. And he's like, no, what I actually discovered again and again is that racist systems create racist views. And that if you create a system that has a certain stance, it profoundly shapes the views of the people engaging with that system in and around it. In other words, try to change attitudes, absolutely, and we need to heal our hearts and souls and minds and relationships, and don't ever lose sight of the systemic change work. And so part of what I hear you saying is like, but the systems will just recreate the problem, even if we have people within those systems who have different attitudes, and you're totally right. And so how do we change the systems? And in that way, I'm like, why am I doing like all this inner work stuff and all this spiritual teaching? Like, maybe I should just be like an activist or a politician, or I'm like, I don't know, what's that alternative life? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm late 40s. I better not have that big of a career pivot. But so part of it is just like, yes, to the systemic change work. That, like, the systems. That's part of why I hammer on about it on social media or public stuff in spiritual circles, because spiritual people can get into this individualism. I'm really at peace. Well, yeah, you're in a broken system, and like your system is replicating terror. And so if you're really at peace, are you actually in a non-dual interconnected stance with the rest of life? If you are, give a little care to participating in changing that system, because it's causing harm to you also. So there's that. But to your other point, I do feel like there's both a fundamentally good instinct within us toward relationship and love and compassion, and that can really be appealed to and harnessed from people of any background. So I feel like it's intergenerational. It can be uncovered. I align with the teachings that are like, enlightenment is just there. You need to get out of the way of it. Like, it's something about our fundamental nature. And I think humans without a lot of course correction tend to turn out badly. That we're pattern making creatures, and we tend, like, in the meaning we make from things can so easily take on a supremacist attitude if we get developmentally stuck, where it's like, instead of I'm the best, like my group is the best, my body is the best, my religion, my way of loving, my identity, whatever that is the best. And so healthy culture and systems correct that tendency and corral it. And they're like, no, we need to be interdependent. We need to not dehumanize our neighbors. We need to give thanks for the harvest. We need to continue toward humility and interconnectedness. So when the cultures that correct our harmful tendencies and harness our good ones, when those cultural systems break down, they're hard to get control of again. Yeah. I think we're in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like you have to keep correcting.
Yeah.
Because we're animals, like the impulse towards protection is real, right? So resources being threatened, family being threatened, whatever perception of threat you think is there,
yeah,
is going to bring online this response of protect.
We can talk about collective wisdom and collective love and healing, but there's collective fear as well. Behind a lot of the good or bad politics in a lot of ways, but let's say the stuff that's really genocidally bad, there's fear driving it. And it's ancestral terror at times. And then that gets systematized and obscured and buried, and then it shows up, net result, supremacist behavior. But if you're like, why are people doing such things? They can't feel good about that. And you dig it back, they're like, I'm scared. But most people, especially not like most adult men, aren't going to be like, yeah, I just feel terror. Like, oh my God, like, how vulnerable are you being? That's unusual. Fantastic. But like, to be able to get to the underlying sorrow, the terror and all that, well, that takes a bit of inner work.
Do you know the writer and comedian named Alok?
Yeah, a little. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a trans person, like Indian American from Texas, and there's a stand-up special that they recently released, and it's like a lot of their public speaking is about that fear that you're talking about. It's a really sweet, emotional, and humorous, and very deep way of looking directly at the fear that they've decided to reject wholesale and live as a trans person. It's really just a little plug for Alok.
No,
it's just because like they speak so directly to that thing that I hear you naming.
I think fear is the most disowned and most quietly impactful aspect of human experience. And I think it's really under considered and a driver in a lot of what we're trying to do. And it's the extreme individualism that I was talking about it's connected to that because there's a fear of depending on one another. It's like, I'm terrified to look at the fact that I need you. You know?
There's so much conversation around grief and grief work and joy and pleasure, but you're right. I don't like, where's the fear circle?
Yeah, if I'm like, fear work, let's like have a 3-day deep dive with terror.
What are you, terror?
Oh, I only got 2 people registering and they're both stalkers. Whatever. So yeah, I know. And it's not, people are really wanting to, I mean, there is talk psychologically about safety and being safe and feeling safe and all that. And so you can't separate out that conversation. When I pray for our kids at night, I will always say, like, may you feel safe and may you actually be safe. Those are 2 different things.
Yeah.
And so, like, they can be terrified and be fine, or they could think it's fine and someone just broke into the house. And so what's hard for people in spiritual circles sometimes to get at, especially white people, especially like people with backgrounds of privilege, whatever it is, not just about race, is like fear is not just an emotion to be processed. It's an actual lack of safety that's present in the world for people, whether it's people with marginalized identities in the US or people being actually genocided, and who like kids that actually just like might get killed today by bombs. And so how do you, like, that level of like terror, justified reality-based terror, I find nothing even in my psychotherapy training, nothing in my training in spiritual healing arts prepared me to know how to sit with it. It's in that way, there's I'm not saying it's mature or constructive, but there's an impulse within me, that wants to see a segment of the US population greet that fear. Many people already live with it. I do not wish that for them. Like, that is like, I do not wish people already systemically marginalized to suffer more in any way. But for the folks who are so dissociated that that's not part of their broad human experience, there's that desire, when you're hurting and someone else isn't really getting it, and so you immaturely or not want to like make them hurt to get it. Be like, come on, you need to get this. I want to share this experience with you. I want you to understand it. There's an impulse to be like, no, like, come get it. Come get what you're dishing out so that you understand it and you reconsider whether or not you want to dish that out on the world.
Don't you think that, death and illness is on everybody's corner? So it's like nobody's really spared from that fear, I guess, of dying or of death.
Yeah, but death from being hunted by other humans is different.
That's different.
I'm talking about that difference. Because much of the world is being hunted by the United States. And that's a different experience. When you have like predatory colonialist energy in your space killing your kids, that's not something that many, at least white Americans, can relate with, because they don't know what it's like to be hunted because of being the group that you are. That's heavy stuff. You feel the vibe shift even just to name it in that way.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's part of why I get exhausted with sometimes with spiritual circles, because it's like, whoa, we're not going to talk about that. We need to get to just processing our personal grief, which is sacred. But I'm like, cool, when do we reach outside of the cultural personal bubble in order to contact what many in the rest of the world are feeling because of us?
But do you feel like having not known that terror, would you be an appropriate fit for a helper in that place? In other words, like, if I don't have, I think about this a lot in my own work. There are places of high need that I feel drawn to show up in. And I've had to reckon with that feeling of wanting to be there, because it is probably a sort of impulse towards saviorism and being useful and valued. But I've also had to realize I'm not a good fit. Like, I'm not a good messenger. I can't relate to that experience very authentically, which doesn't mean I don't have something to offer, but there are others who do, who are better messengers of support. And
yes and no. I mean, I think it would be important if I were to try to lean into that type of teaching to be like, this is what I have and have not lived. However, I think, I was co-leading a call yesterday about gender, feminism, and whatnot. And part of what I sit with, I was with a co-lead and mostly like yielding the space to her. But it is nonetheless disproportionately the responsibility of men to end sexism. Sure, women and queer people can perpetuate those things, but it's men reproducing and embodying patriarchal bullshit. And so in that way, men kind of need to take the lead without centering themselves all at once. And so it's like, recognize, like as an American, recognize the profound harm that's happening because of the nation that I'm embedded in, without obnoxiously centering America, America, America all the time. And so I think in that way, I'm both ideal and not a fit for that. And so it would be a kind of thing, if I imagine it, where I'm co-leading with someone who's lived that reality, but to put it on them to have to explain that and hold it, it's actually a relief to have the one causing the problem be like, this is the problem, this is why it's problematic. Fill in the gaps as needed, but I'm not going to put the pressure on you to have to break that down. I'm going to break it down. So there is a balance there. And it's the responsibility of people from more colonialist ancestors to create a more, if you will, decolonized world, like psychologically, systemically, whatever. There's a disproportionate responsibility to shift those dynamics. Yeah.
It's making, were you going to say something, Tim?
Well, I was just thinking about the flip side of this. Every new kid has to be re-acculturated. Right. Is that like, there's so much potential for the kind of shifts that you're talking about in there as well. Like, that would be the upside.
Right. If you were born anew and had to redo it.
And constantly people are being born anew. And there is a phenomenon of people being more liberal as kids and then becoming more conservative or reactionary or calcified as older people. So this whole idea of the young generation, if the young people vote, I think some of that is just always young people are more flexible, often less formed, but also you do have this chance with maybe that's a place to look at your responsibility. I don't have kids, both of y'all do, but that's one place you can begin to transmit this culture. And that's the upside, is you have a chance with a new generation to have people begin to step into something that they're in accidentally or not by choice a part of. You were born into this, and here's where the lines trace back, and here's how you can be with it. There's just a little bit of hope there beyond kind of I think, sort of rose-colored glasses of getting saved by the next generation type thing.
Yeah, there's something interesting shifting around semantics that support systems, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, Daniel, with these systems that continue to be perpetuated if we're not constantly thwarting the replication of them. And did you read, there's a book called The Raceless Anti-Racist. Do you know that book?
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's talking a lot about taking away these notions of race, which the mythology of it, and actually changing the language around it and what that would yield, which is kind of and she's very accurately and smartly addressing the issues of what about supporting the richness of a culture? And she's like, I'm not talking about culture, I'm talking about race. And so she can get it's a very thin line, I think, and an interesting and exciting one. To me, those sort of explorations feel like where my hope goes is, reconfiguring the way we're constructing these systems.
It matters how we think and talk about things.
Yeah.
One of the areas of passion for me about that, and I'll go back and forth with even our team about how to word something in a newsletter. And I'm like, no, we're not talking about other energies, we're talking about other people. To say their energies is slightly depersonifying. These are other people. And so the language of other than human people, like the Hudson River or the Mount Diablo in the Bay Area or whatever it might be, these are actual community members. They're people. They're not human people, but not all people are human. They have legal personhood. They have economic and there are laws and need to consider them. And there's a whole movements around that, about the rights of nature, but it's really a process of affirming the personhood of the other than humans. And so the way we talk about it starts to take on real implication when it's baked into the legal system. and whatnot. So yeah, I I mean, I'm trying in my own way to be a whole person and to know how to model that for my kids and for the people that I'm working with. And how we think and talk about stuff matters a lot. And sometimes a different framing can get traction and have a big impact. But also, I don't know when I'm going to die. I mean, if I had another 40 years, it'd be awesome, but I have no idea. I was hospitalized in October for the first time. It's just an infection. It was okay. But I'm like, hey, I'm in the hospital now. Okay. And my hair is more gray than not. Interesting.
Yeah.
And so I want to live the rest of my life in a way that I look back and I'm like, yeah, that was generationally aligned. That was a life well spent. That was, that still makes sense in 200 years from now. Well played. Because I'm part of a larger current in a larger moment. It's not my business how it plays out. I don't get to know that. I just need to hold down my specific piece of it.
You start meetings, or the ones that I was in, and I've sort of adopted it but it makes me think of that where you say, let's make good use of our time.
Yeah.
Which is pretty simple, but it's that essentially is, yeah, like, and, I think being alive is a good use of time. I wouldn't, if we have to get really bare bones about it. But yeah, if we're in the action of doing a thing,
To what you're saying, Tim, I appreciated about how do we learn, and it can either be discouraging or encouraging. And like, I worry about that. Like, if I die today, is there any actual impact? Is it forgotten in a week? Like, did anything matter? That kind of thing. And part of what has been kind of awesome about being born into a highly amnesiac identity in white suburban Ohio with no like, I got a bunch of poison ivy as a kid and no one ever taught me how to identify the plant. And I'm like, wow, what the hell? And so I'm like, I'm dying. I'm getting steroid shots. I can't even see. And like, could someone orient me? I'm like, okay, back to get some more of it. And so what I realized once I actually came back into ritual arts and all that is this stuff is learnable. Like, there's nothing that predisposes me to be into any of this. And there's like, how'd you get into this? I'm like, eating acid as a teenager, reading books on shamanism. I don't know. But however I got into it, I realized it's learnable. And that's good news. Like, that at any age, we can come back into relationship. And that it's encouraging in a sense because it's, I love working with people from really culturally disconnected backgrounds and seeing them just come back into connection with the land and with the spirits and realize that they're also made of stars and weird old magic and other things. So yeah, I worry sometimes that the way I come across can be like harsh or perfectionistic, but beneath it, it's longing for us to do better because there's so much at stake. We're at such a crossroads kind of moment with our species and the planet, and the shifts that we need, they're not actually that complicated. There's a lot of it.
So
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I saw this movie. I think it's finally being released. It's about John and Yoko. It might be called One to One. Anyway, it's a documentary and it's about the year that they moved to New York, first moved to New York and lived in this kind of porous, fairly accessible Greenwich Village apartment and got very immersed in the causes of the time and bringing, and like when that movie was over and the director was there, I had this like frustration that had built up and I was like, why? The first frustration was, why is there nobody who is speaking the way they were speaking? And they were not speaking the most articulately. They were new to all that they were experiencing and propagating, and it was messy, and the film accounts for that. But they were using their voice to speak
about things that really mattered and that were kind of the core things. They were about interconnection and love. And so we had this time where those people were on the nightly news. And why didn't it work? That was my second frustration. Like, why didn't that work? And then I can feel cynical about yeah, I feel the invitation. I have this sense of what we're being invited into right now. But we might just flub it again, or I don't know. There's a kind of like, I'm curious, like what your take on that is. Like, it seemed like so many conditions were there for the opening of consciousness. The LSD was there. The poets on the nightly news were there. The various civil rights movements were active and potent, and ecological movements. All that stuff was there. And it's like, what?
I see when you're speaking, I just have the image of someone trying to start like a fire in a primitive skills way, not with the lighter, but like the flint and the spark. And it's like, and there's a lot of attempts. And I don't know. I feel like our lives matter in ways that are hard to know and to characterize. And we can, with simple choices, send out ripples that outlive us. And I will sometimes doubt whether or not it's useful or reaching people what I'm doing. There have been times where the spirits will show like they're dumping out a big bag of letters, and I'm like, what's that? And they're like, this is your fan mail from the dead. This is from people that you'll never know and never meet directly, and who are no longer alive, but have benefited from what you're doing. So sit down and read a few or something. I'm like, oh, okay. It's a reminder that I don't have a good handle on the benefit that might be coming from what I'm doing. And it's not, I don't know, I guess there's a thing about what's our responsibility. So the way I hold it is my responsibility to like fulfill as completely as I can my potential or destiny while I'm on earth. Not more or less than that. Yeah. And it's tricky because I don't know the contours of all of it. Yeah.
And it's only going to last 80 years-ish.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Yeah, but no, that's what I'm saying. Another 40, I'll take it. And but whatever I'm trying to do, it's not mine exactly. It didn't just start with me. And so the reverberation of it is also, yeah, it's hard to capture, but there's something about experiencing oneself as part of a larger lineage or current or movement that is helpful for my ability to focus. Yeah, it's like, okay, the person in the chain in front of me needs me to fulfill this thing, or their work is going to be messed up. And to honor what has been transmitted to me, I need to do my particular part here. Whether or not we're in a formal lineage, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that go ahead.
Do you like, what metaphors do you like for that? I heard chain and current. Like, what do you see when you imagine that kind of connection?
My favorite work, I'm not sure with the metaphor, but my favorite work of fiction is Imagica by Clive Barker. And in it, there's a kind of opening that happens in the solstice, I think, every 1,000 years. And so there are folks who are posted up and need to be in their particular role or job in that window every 1,000 years for as part of a team for the whole operation to happen as it needs to. And it may or may not. So then you got to wait 1,000 years again. But there's something about, if each of us had that level of like gravitas, where it's like your particular, like so much hinges on you being in your alignment, in the moment, the spark, the particular effort that is your particular life, that everything hinges on that. I mean, maybe that's an overwhelming amount of pressure, but so we can balance it with like, it's okay, relax, have fun, it's like,
It can be messy.
yeah, it can be messy. Like your kid might take your wallet, you might freak out on them or not. So that's also true. But then also there's a sense of like our lives, not just like it matters. It's like, you're okay, you were important, not in that reassuring way, but in like, we're way more interdimensionally interconnected and impactful than we may realize. And that can be a focusing kind of force, I guess. It's not about being inflated or thinking you're like everybody else is also that important.
Right.
But
you are special, just not any more special than anyone else.
Yeah, like that. Stars in a bigger constellation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a, when you say that, there's a like, oof. Not wanting to waste time, wanting to make sure things are coherent with my values and truths, wanting to eliminate the stuff that's discordant. I also feel like the importance of joy and pleasure is in there as well.
Yeah. And to make a plug for fear, we were kind of giving fear a bad rap earlier, but fear, like we call it taqwa in Arabic. It can have a connotation of like fear of the holy, or of like being intimidated by God, or by the God within. And like in Quran, there's a rendering that you will read back the tablet of the record of your deeds before God at the end of your life, the end of time, and that tablet, we could say it's your body, or the way the body stores memory. But what's interesting to me is not like some judgmental person you don't like is going to read it back. It's you. It's like how to go. You're like, I'm not sure. Oh, well, we have a record. Here's how it went. Just read it back. Be like, oh, damn, that is how it went. Oh, look at me. I had a nice day. That's how it went too. And then, but that feeling of reporting back, which ideally happens before your death, that's kind of scary. Like, that's intimidating.
Accountability, right? It's like being seen. To me, it's the value of being witnessed, because I can noodle around and improvise all I want, but there's a very different choice-making mechanism or value to what happens when I'm witnessed. And same as in return. That sort of fundamental relationship in seeing and being seen, even if it's by something we can't necessarily see. I've been in conversation. My main spiritual teacher is Sufi, and we have been in conversation about my relationship to God for over, a couple decades. And it's always, I have a hard time understanding what that is and how to do it. And I want him to give me like a prescription to like go sit and do it. And he's like, I'm not going to do that, Weena. And you're going to, and it's been a weird, twisty way to find kind of what you're saying, which is like that conversation of accountability, of being seen, of being in relationship to something that holds you, that you belong to, has not felt as tangible as I imagine it is for other people. But it is starting to make more sense when I, like through the body and through impulse, I guess, is where and again, like not that it's my impulse or even my body, but the reclamation of that relationship feels like where I can start feeling it more predictably maybe, or reliably. But I like what you're saying about the kind of like the data. Like, let's look at the data a little bit. And I was thinking of you, Tim, because we had a big conversation yesterday of what happens when you take a moment and kind of reflect back on impact that you've had, or letters you've received from the dead, or a thank you from somebody, or places you fucked up and could have done better. And I don't know like what time frame to take that in, but taking those moments of compiling data and allowing it to have some impact about where you move next feels important as part of that relationship to the divine, I guess. I just don't know how it looks yet, really, in a sort of rhythmic way for myself.
Yeah. No, I follow. As I've gotten older, perhaps from leadership, I don't know, I've become more deliberate, more cautious, more methodical, systematic in how I move. Because it's like I'm moving in a crowded bus, or like I know that however I move, it's going to have all this repercussion or impact on others, my family, people close to me, whatever, employees, all that. And that doesn't mean there can't be free expression, but there's a certain gravitas or a responsibility in my choices that feels real. We'll say in Quran that Allah is closer to us than our jugular vein. And so in that way, there's the innermost layers of what we are also terrifying. They're beautiful, they're expansive, they're loving, they're all that. But the most authentic or most core layers of what we are bring in their like awesomeness, this implicit accountability, like you're saying. And that, it doesn't have to be a heavy thing, but any part of us that's out of alignment is going to feel threatened by that.
Yeah, my teacher used to say your old patterns will get the loudest when you're about to shift.
Yeah, like that.
Mm-hmm.
This also makes me think of yielding. Like when you say that these things so close to us, like our very essence is like, is our accountability partner, or is it's like also basically like I am terrified. I am a small piece of the big thing. I don't understand the big thing. And to be in a relationship of yielding to the big thing feels like good when I can do it. It feels good when I can do it. Yeah.
I know we'll probably finish soon, but there's a expression that gets translated into English from one of my ancestral heroes. Ibn al-Arabi is a 11th century Andalusian mystic Muslim. But he's describing the self and the journey of the self and saying, when that which has never been disappears, and when what to say, that when we're in a state of great alignment or flow or entrainment with destiny, there's not, it's not only that we don't feel separate, but there's not necessarily, like the idea of a separate self doesn't even make that much sense there. And that's intimate. But that as soon as we're like, oh, I'm having an intimate experience, it's like, well, there I am again. No problem. But then there's a shadow cast. It's okay. And so to come into alignment is threatening also because it's a kind of death.
Mm-hmm. You go away. I mean, I would say one of the most sublime experiences for me is disappearing, is going away. And it almost is usually through the body, like through movement, sometimes in session work where I go away. And it does feel sublime.
And part of what I guess I end up harping on with my public teaching is like, what do we think is foreign to us? Because if we're in a state of alignment and we encounter something and we think it's fundamentally foreign to us, then we're going to get jarred back into duality, which isn't bad. And it's like, okay, now we need to learn about that. You think MAGA doesn't run in your blood? You think malice, racist, lazy, mean-spiritedness doesn't run in your blood? Well, then that's okay. But then there's an invitation to recognize that's also you. Like, to complement the verse from Quran about God being closer to you than your jugular vein, is also hadith or saying from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Basically, that the shaitan or the devil or the malice, metaphysical evil, is in our blood. And someone asks him, like, even your blood, man? Like, you're the prophet. We really dig on you. And he's like, even my blood, definitely. And so that's also right there. And so if we think something is foreign, that's an invitation to become more intimate with whatever that is and to be drawn to that. And then, we can carry on just not existing in a sense. Yeah.
It brings me back to the fear thing too, like going where you're most afraid or going towards. I remember one of my favorite playwrights says she starts out by writing like the worst fucking play she can imagine, like the one she would hate seeing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it,
what? Yeah.
Young Jean Lee. Yeah, she's awesome.
Well, I want to be conscious of our time. I know we are close to your barrier here, Danielle, and so many thanks for like coming into our lives in this way and sharing back and forth. And it's felt good. It's felt like kinship kind of a vibe. I appreciate it.
It's good. I appreciate the sort of unscripted conversation, eventually finding a groove with just exploring different aspects of the weird journey, being alive. So yeah.
Thank you for your generosity of time and energy and showing up so, like open and willing to sort of step into not knowing where we were headed. And I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, good. Thank you both.
We just wrapped up with Daniel Foor, and that was a really, really rich and interesting conversation. And
this dude's a trip.
It was less of a laughy episode, which in some ways is good to sort of hold me towards a little more serious tone, because I feel like I want to play and giggle, and maybe sometimes that's a way of me like skirting around stuff that does hold more weight and impact in the ways that I think and move. So I sort of appreciate that he kept, bringing us back there a little bit.
To essential things. This was a real deep dive into, I think, kind of breaking things down to the smallest, most essential building blocks of what is this? Mm-hmm. What are we? What is good? And he's a really remarkable teacher and human in voice. And it was really neat to bring somebody that I know we've both admired into our conversational sphere and spend time.
Yes. And he has so much to offer. And as I said earlier, I really like his role in the village is a really important one. And I can see how essential, but the benefits that come from him being in service that way for the whole community, how it all spreads out. And I feel the impact of his work. And I appreciate how willing he was, again, to like step into a conversation not really knowing us and being up for it. And
we're two virtual unknowns. We're up and coming.
Well, thank you for listening, and let us know what you think.
See you next time.
Bye.